Somewhere in Britain, someone's about to scrap a car worth £40,000. They don't know it. Rusting under a tarpaulin, forgotten in a garage. Jeremy Clarkson. Ferraris made grown men weep in front of him. Just call cars exactly like that priceless. Not exotic, not rare, ordinary, not sentiment, numbers. Go check your garage. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what Jeremy Clarkson has spent the last few years doing to modern cars. He's been taking them apart, publicly, savagely, and not without reason. He's written at length about touchscreens that bury the heater controls 3 menus deep, forcing you to stab at a piece of glass at 70 miles an hour just to stop your feet from freezing. About cars that weigh as much as a small house because of battery packs and crash sensors and cameras pointing in 11 directions. Each one adding weight, each one adding cost, none of them adding an ounce of joy. About software subscriptions, paying monthly, if you can believe it, to unlock heated seats that are already fitted, already wired, already warm, just waiting behind a paywall for your card details, like a nightclub bouncer standing between you and a feature you've already bought and paid for. He's called it an industry that stopped thinking of the driver as the point of the exercise. An industry run increasingly by people who love the numbers a car produces rather than the car itself. Boardrooms full of people who have never once felt a gearbox click home with satisfying precision, deciding what the rest of us are and aren't allowed to enjoy. And here's the thing about a man who spent 40 years falling in and out of love with machines. When he turns away from something, he doesn't just walk off in a sulk. He goes looking for what he lost, and what he found, what he's been finding quietly over the last few years, in garages and barns and the back pages of specialist auction catalogues, in dusty lockups behind terraced houses and beneath tarpaulins in fields that haven't been ploughed since the Blair government, is that the thing he was mourning never actually disappeared. It just went quiet. It went into hiding in ordinary driveways, under ordinary tarpaulins, owned by ordinary people who had absolutely no idea what they were sitting on. A retired postman with a Mark I Golf he's owned since 1985. A widow with her late husband's Triumph Stag, still taxed, still insured, sitting untouched in a garage nobody's had the heart to clear out. A farmer with a Series Land Rover held together by rust, string, and 40 years of unwavering loyalty. That's the story today. Not the collector's item worth millions that you'll never own. The car that's already yours, or your father's, or sitting in a lockup somewhere with a flat battery, and a parking ticket from 2019 still tucked under the wiper, curling at the edges, entirely forgotten. Because Clarkson isn't talking about Ferraris this time, he's talking about you. Let's deal in facts, because this is where it stops being sentiment and starts being genuinely startling. The classic and modern classic car market has been doing something extraordinary while nobody outside the trade was paying attention. Ordinary cars that were mass-produced, that sat in supermarket car parks by the thousand, that nobody in their right mind thought of as an investment, have been quietly appreciating at rates that would embarrass most stock portfolios. Financial advisors who spend their working lives fretting over ISAs and pension drawdowns would struggle to match the returns some of these unloved old bangers have delivered simply by being left alone in a garage. Take the Mark I Golf GTI. When it launched, it was a hot hatch for enthusiastic accountants. Practical, reasonably priced, the sort of car you bought because it was sensible and just happened to be fun on a Sunday morning with the windows down. A clean original example today can fetch tens of thousands of pounds. Not the rare ones, not the works team specials, the ordinary ones. The ones that used to sit outside chip shops on a Friday night with a bag of vinegar-soaked chips steaming up the windscreen. The same story plays out with the Peugeot 205 GTI, a car so common in the 1980s that finding one felt like finding a pigeon. Everywhere. Unremarkable. Taken entirely for granted. Now it's a 5-figure proposition if it's rust-free and unmolested, and good ones are getting harder to find every single month. The Ford Sierra Cosworth, once the terror of company car parks and the pride of every self-respecting boy racer, now commands prices that would have seemed like fantasy to the people queuing up to buy them new. The Mark II Escort, the Renault 5 Turbo, cars built to be driven hard, used up, and eventually scrapped without a second thought. And instead, the survivors have become some of the most sought-after machines on the market, chased by collectors who weren't even born when they rolled off the production line. And it's not just the fast ones. Ordinary saloons, ordinary estates, ordinary diesel workhorses from the 80s and 90s are climbing too, simply because so few of them exist anymore. Scrappage schemes designed to clear the roads of old bangers, MOT failures over trivial corrosion. Decades of "it's not worth fixing, love, just get a new one" have wiped out entire generations of perfectly ordinary cars. What's left is suddenly rare. And rare in the classic world is the only word that matters. Rarer, in some cases, than the exotic machinery that once shared showroom space with them. This is what Clarkson has been circling in his columns. He's watched auction houses report record prices for cars that were never meant to be special, cars his younger self would have driven past without a second glance. He's watched values climb, not because of nostalgia alone, but because of pure, brutal supply and demand. There simply aren't many left. And every year, fewer still, as more rot quietly away in fields and gardens, unrecorded and unmourned. The insurers noticed first, quietly reclassifying huge swathes of ordinary old cars as classic, and adjusting premiums accordingly. Because a car that's hard to replace is a car worth protecting differently, and because the actuaries, of all people, worked out what was happening before most owners did. Which brings us to the real question. Why now? Why is this happening to cars that were never meant to be anything other than transport? Here's where Clarkson's argument about modern cars and his argument about old cars fold neatly into one another, because the very things he criticises in new cars are precisely the things old cars never had to apologise for. An old car doesn't have a software subscription. It doesn't have a touch screen that needs an update before the heater will work, or a firmware patch that bricks the infotainment system on a motorway hard shoulder. It has a switch. You press it, the heater comes on. There is a satisfaction in that simplicity that engineers spent decades perfecting, and modern manufacturers, in Clarkson's telling, spent about 15 years quietly dismantling in the name of progress that nobody actually asked for. Old cars were built to be understood. Every panel bolts on individually. No fused, unrepairable modules that require replacing an entire door because a handle snapped. No sealed units that force you back to a main dealer with your wallet open. Every component was designed with the assumption that one day, somebody with a socket set and a Saturday afternoon would need to fix it, probably in the rain, probably swearing, and probably rather enjoying it despite themselves. That assumption, that the owner might actually want to maintain and understand the machine they'd bought, has almost vanished from new car design. It never left the old ones. It's baked into their bones. There's also the matter of feel, and Clarkson has written about this more than almost anything else. Unassisted steering that tells you, through your fingertips, exactly what the front tyres are doing on the road surface. Every camber change, every patch of loose gravel, communicated instantly and honestly. A gearbox you operate with intent, not a paddle behind the wheel, managed by an algorithm that's decided on your behalf what gear you deserve to be in. Analog dials with needles that sweep rather than digital numbers that simply appear, cold and instant and somehow soulless by comparison. These aren't decorative flourishes. They're a direct, unfiltered line between the driver and the machine. And it's precisely that connection Clarkson has spent years arguing modern cars have engineered away, layer by layer, screen by screen. And then there's the smell. The specific, slightly intoxicating combination of old vinyl, warm engine oil, sun-baked dashboard plastic, and decades of accumulated character that no new car, however expensive, however meticulously designed, can replicate, because it simply hasn't had the time. You cannot manufacture patina. You can only wait for it, year after year, mile after mile, one careful owner at a time. Put simply, an old car isn't outdated. In Clarkson's world, and increasingly in the markets, it's unspoiled. It survived the era before the accountants took over, before the lawyers got involved, before the marketing department decided what premium was supposed to mean. And survival, it turns out, has a price tag, one that grows steeper with every passing year. Clarkson doesn't deal in vague nostalgia. When he talks about which old cars deserve their new reputation, he's specific, and his choices tell you exactly what he values. The original Range Rover, the classic, built like a farm implement that had accidentally wandered into polite society. No electronics to fail, no screens to freeze mid-journey. Just a go-anywhere honesty that modern luxury SUVs, for all their air suspension and driver assist wizardry, have never quite recaptured, no matter how hard their marketing departments insist otherwise. Values for clean, original examples have risen so steeply that what was once a farmer's runabout, mud-splattered and utterly unpretentious, is now genuinely sought after by collectors who never set foot on a farm in their lives and wouldn't know a sheep dip from a cattle grid. The air-cooled Porsche 911, anything built before the water-cooled cars arrived in the late 90s, sits at the top of nearly every enthusiast's list, Clarkson's included. These are cars with engines you can hear working, genuinely working, clattering and whirring away behind you like something alive. Gearboxes with real mechanical resistance, and a driving experience so unfiltered it borders on confrontational, demanding your full attention and rewarding it handsomely. Prices for the best examples now run well into six figures, and even the ordinary ones have climbed steadily out of reach of the casually curious, priced instead for people who genuinely understand what they're buying. The Land Rover Defender, in its original form, before it was reinvented as a fashion accessory for people who've never seen mud outside of a gastropub car park, built to be repaired with a hammer and a bit of patience in a shed by someone with no formal training whatsoever, just a willingness to get their hands dirty and a healthy disregard for the manufacturer's warranty. That honesty, Clarkson argues, is worth more now than it ever was when the car was new and entirely unremarkable. And then the ordinary heroes, the Mark I and Mark II Golfs, the early BMW 3 Series with its straight-six engine and its perfectly weighted steering, the Alfa Romeo Spider with all its glorious, romantic unreliability. Cars that were never meant to be museum pieces, simply well-engineered, well-proportioned, honestly built machines that happen to survive long enough, against considerable odds, to become rare. What unites every single one of these is the absence of everything Clarkson complains about in new cars. No screens standing between you and the controls. No subscription gating the features you already paid for. No 200 extra kilograms of battery and sensor hardware dulling the way the thing turns into a corner, sitting heavy and reluctant, where the old car sits light and eager. Just a machine, doing what a machine is supposed to do, built by people who were allowed to care about how it felt rather than how it photographed for a brochure aimed at people who'd never actually drive it. Now here's where it gets personal, because this is the part of the story people are genuinely reacting to. Up and down the country, people are opening garage doors they haven't touched in years, and discovering almost by accident that the old banger they inherited or forgot about, or simply couldn't be bothered to sell, is worth considerably more than they ever imagined. A Mark II Escort found under dust sheets in a barn, untouched for 2 decades, cobwebs draped across the bonnet like something from a fairy tale, selling at auction for tens of thousands. A Peugeot 205 GTI, bought new by someone's grandfather and quietly stored ever since. Tax discs from 3 decades ago still curling in the glove box, fetching a price that shocked the entire family at the reading of the will. This is happening because so much of the ordinary car population from the 70s, 80s and 90s simply no longer exists. It rusted quietly away in gardens and fields. It got scrapped for a few £100s by people who had no idea what they were letting go of. It failed an MOT over a trivial corrosion issue that nobody thought was worth the money to fix, and off it went to the crusher without ceremony. Entire model ranges, once common as pigeons on every high street in Britain, are now down to a few hundred surviving examples worldwide, tracked and catalogued by owners' clubs with an almost religious devotion. And the ones that remain, particularly the ones kept in genuine, unrestored, original condition, have become extraordinarily desirable precisely because originality, at this point, is rarer than performance ever was. There's a term the trade uses for this: barn-find energy. The car that's slightly tired, slightly dusty, entirely unmolested. No botched modifications from a well-meaning but ham-fisted previous owner. No replaced panels sourced from a scrapyard and never quite colour-matched. No aftermarket parts fitted by someone with more enthusiasm than skill. Collectors will pay a genuine premium for a car that's honestly old rather than one that's been over-restored into something new pretending to be old. Its history sanded away, along with its patina. Which means the advice Clarkson is effectively giving, whether he means to or not, is this: before you scrap it, before you part exchange it for pennies against some soulless new hatchback, before you let it rot quietly at the bottom of the drive under a tarpaulin nobody's checked in years, check. Actually check. Get someone who knows what they're looking at to have a proper look. Because the difference between worthless heap and genuinely valuable survivor can come down to a model year, an original engine, an unmolested interior, and a bit of patience with the paperwork that most people simply throw away without a second thought. It's a strange kind of justice, really. The cars that were never meant to be special, the ones nobody thought to protect or preserve or even particularly like at the time, have become special simply by refusing to disappear. Now, if you're the sort of person who's just done a mental inventory of every car that's ever sat in your family's garage, you're exactly who this channel is for. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the notification bell so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Tell me, is there an old car in your family that might be worth more than anyone realised? I read every single one, and I promise you, some of these stories are genuinely astonishing. So let's go back to where we started. Jeremy Clarkson, a man who has driven the fastest, most expensive, most extraordinary machines ever built, looked at an old, ordinary car, the kind most people wouldn't think twice about, and called it priceless. And now you understand why he's right. It's not sentiment. It's not a man getting misty-eyed about his youth. It's the direct, logical consequence of everything that's gone wrong with new cars and everything that quietly went right with the old ones. Modern manufacturing gave us screens instead of switches, subscriptions instead of ownership, weight instead of feel. And in doing so, it made the honest, mechanical, unfiltered old car, the one you can actually understand, actually fix, actually feel through your fingertips, genuinely irreplaceable. Every year, fewer of them survive. Every year, the ones that remain become rarer, more desirable, more valuable. That old Golf, that tired Escort, that Range Rover your grandfather bought because it was practical, not because he thought it would one day be worth a fortune. They're not relics. They're the last honest cars left. And the market, finally, is catching up to what Clarkson has been saying all along. The question isn't whether old cars have become valuable. They have. The question is whether you know what's sitting in your garage right now. And that's the strange, quietly wonderful truth of it. The car everyone dismissed as worthless might just be the most honest, most valuable thing on your street. Clarkson spent years mourning what modern cars had lost. And it turns out all along, plenty of us had it parked outside, gathering dust, waiting for someone to notice. If this one got you thinking, or if you've got a story about an old family car that turned out to be worth far more than anyone expected, I'd genuinely love to hear it in the comments. If you enjoyed this, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one, where we'll be diving into another story from the world of British motoring you won't want to miss.